2025 is over, and that means it's time to make cynically motivated list videos for easy content in January. Unfortunately, I don't quite have the heart to actually be lazy about this. My top 10 best skins video is 20 minutes long and has almost 4,000 words of original script, which is not how you're supposed to do that. That is not the Watch Mojo way. If I was smart, I would just recycle my old scripts and voiceovers with minimal edits and have my editor, Minimo, which, by the way, say hi, Minimo. For those who don't know, Minimo is the one you can credit for all the cool music choices in my shorts. But anyway, if I was smart, I would be a lot lazier and just have my editor repurpose the old shorts we've already done, but I am not smart, and I am kind of bad at my job, actually, so let's do another 3,700 words of original script about the worst skins of the year. If you've been following my reviews over the course of 2025, you may already know this, but my policy is that any skin that is sold through the f***ass gacha gambling system earns an automatic F rank from me, for the simple reason that the gacha system sells these skins at a potential maximum value of $250. And if a video game cosmetic wants to be worth $250 goddamn dollars, it had better come with complimentary oral sex and a good bottle of wine. So the gacha skins get a collective honorable mention on this list for being just deeply, desperately unpleasant as a concept and insulting as a product. But for the rest of the skins, we'll be discussing them in terms of character design and aesthetics and cosmetic quality. Subjectively, anyway. By the way, if you're looking for a nuanced and balanced and carefully considered dispassionate weighing of pros and cons here, you won't find any of that in this video. This is a top 10 worst list. I am here to tell you which skins are shitty and why I think they're shitty, and I'm not going to be playing devil's advocate with myself while I do that. The top 10 best skins list is available if you prefer good vibes and positivity, but in this video, we're going to focus on the negatives. Like, for example, number 10, Grand Reckoning Draven. I originally graded Grand Reckoning Draven with a C, and I do stand by that grade, if only on the basis that he is a reasonably competent cosmetic in theory. The color scheme works on the values, the costume is coherent, and I kind of like the cloth-wrapped red handles for his axes better than I do the spiky nonsense on his base form. It is, on the technical merits, fine. Now, the issue that puts this skin on this list is one of concept, because you're telling me that when Noxus holds a grand reckoning, a triumph for a returning conqueror, the biggest and most ostentatious imperial party in their entire culture, the loudest and most important social event in the whole city, you're telling me that Draven's response to that is to dress down? Draven is the biggest attention whore in Runeterra, short of maybe Aurelian Soul. He's a consummate showman, a wrestling heel who loves nothing more than getting the crowd's attention. Their cheers, their boos, but never their indifference. His entire life, everything he does, everything he has ever done, is to make himself the center of attention, no matter what, no matter when. But for a grand reckoning? This skin is trying to tell me that Draven would shave his mustache down, simplify his costume, comb down his hair, get rid of all of his own colors, wear a sparse costume, and make his axes simpler and less attention-grabbing? What the fuck are you talking about? Draven here looks like a supporting character. He looks like one of 100 other Reckoners fighting in the pits. He looks like a non-playable character, a mini-boss at best. Where is the flamboyance? Where is the attitude? Where is the all-consuming need to be center stage, to be the loudest and most unignorable motherfucker in a 20-mile radius? Where is the Draven in all of this? It is absolutely nowhere, and that makes for a total failure of concept. Number 9, Pool Party Twitch. Twitch here is a much less interesting failure than Draven is. With Draven, you can have discussions about his personality, his relationship to Noxian culture. You could argue over whether he might concede to dress down to make room for his older brother Darius to take center stage for a day. There are discussions that it is possible to have about Draven. With Pool Party Twitch, though, yeah, this skin is just kind of shit. There really isn't anything interesting to say here, it's just kind of a shit skin. And it's really no surprise that it's a shit skin, because it's a Battle Pass skin. And in the first half of 2025, Riot was pretty clearly pushing some boundaries, trying to figure out just how little effort and how half-assed they could get away with being on their Battle Pass rewards. And the result of that is this fucking thing, which can only barely be called not a chroma, because it does change the model a little bit with the Super Soaker crossbow, and tropical drink grenades, which, by the way, why the fuck are they tropical drinks and not water balloons? I mean, the answer to that clearly is who cares, because Riot certainly didn't give a shit about the answer to that question. This is just a minimal viable product. It's the absolute least amount of effort they could possibly have put in and still technically call it shippable. It is an entirely mundane set of creative failures, and frankly, I have spent too long talking about this. It doesn't deserve this level of scrutiny. Number 8. Inkshadow Renekton. In the Inkshadow universe, a dystopian tech dictatorship is polluting the world, and natural spirits and brave rebels are fighting back with the power of mystical tattoos. Renekton here is supposed to be a river spirit, the avatar of nature's wrath, taking revenge for having his river realm polluted, and he offers his magical tattoo to any mortal who will help him deliver his vengeance. And if you could tell literally any of that from looking at him, well, congratulations on either being a psychic or fucking delusional, because no, you couldn't. None of that is in there. He has tattoos, technically, these barely visible shadows of markings on his back, which, like, surely the whole fucking point of making him this pale is so the tattoos are more visible on his skin? You fucking think so. And yeah, he may be a crocodile, but what about any of this says river spirit to you? If Renekton here is thematically the embodiment of nature striking back against industrialism, then why the hell is he wearing all of that clearly machine-made metal on him? This could have been like industrial scrap waste that has embedded itself into his body, and it represents the violation that he's raging against. His clothes could have been old plastic bags and trash, or, alternatively, he could have been unique in the skin line by being themed after plants and moss and water, and he could have had some nature imagery in his look. But no, all of that would be too interesting, and Inkshadow is not a skin line that cares very much about interesting. They also could just have written him a concept that actually, like, matches his design. Like, he could be, I don't know, an escaped science experiment from the evil tech city who's now using his tattoo powers to take revenge or whatever. It still wouldn't be good, but at least it would feel like less of a total waste of a potentially interesting idea. Ultimately, though, it doesn't really matter what kind of concept you write for this Renekton skin, though, because it would still suck. Because in a tattoo-based, tattoo-themed tattoo skin line about tattoos, Renekton shows more skin than any other champion, but none of his design is built around tattoos. You had one goddamn job, Renekton. Number 7. Nightbringer Hecarim. Much like with Pool Party Twitch, the failures of Nightbringer Hecarim are entirely uninteresting. He is better on the technical merits than Twitch. The skin at least makes sense within its setting. There's no poison bomb tropical drink strapped to a Hawaii-patterned greatcoat here. No, the trouble with Hecarim is that, first of all, this skin is completely redundant, and second of all, it is so fucking boring. If you want a skin of Hecarim as a devil-coded, evil Hell Rider, High Noon is right there with a much bolder color scheme, a flame body, and a horse skull head. If you want a skin of Hecarim as this pitiless embodiment of dispassionate cosmic violence, Arcana is the more interesting version of that, or you could go with Cosmic even if that's what you're into. Nightbringer does literally nothing better than any of Hecarim's other skins, which is bad enough, but on top of that, it is, in and of itself, just fucking boring. Now, this is a problem that's shared across the whole skin line. Literally every time there's an opportunity to make an interesting creative decision, you can count on Dawnbringer and Nightbringer skins to swing hard towards the middle of the road. The result is a skin which is supposed to be an embodiment of primordial cosmic chaos, the very vision of pandemonium on the battlefield, but which shows up as the world's most generic high fantasy armor slop. I could name He-Man villains that look scarier and more chaotic than Hecarim does here. There is no chaos, there is symmetry. There is no disruption or instability. There is generic adherence to tropes. There is no threat, and there is no menace. This is a D-tier MMO raid dungeon mid-boss. Number 6. Fatebreaker Taric. Fatebreaker Taric should be added to the dictionary as the very definition of being an also-ran. Fatebreaker and Fatemaker is in theory quite an interesting skin line. It's this Persian/Arabic-themed fantasy skin line where gods like Nasus build the fate of mortals from fractal stained glass in vast libraries, and ambitious mortals with a gift for prophecy like Malzahar execute daring heists and raids on those libraries to change their own fate. And then Taric is also here for some reason. He's supposed to be a soldier whose fate is to die on a battlefield, but who's determined to live as a poet instead, which, like, Okay, but he looks like neither of those things. He's dressed way too nice for a beleaguered soldier who's trying to avoid death, but not nearly flamboyantly enough for a hedonistic poet who's trying to prolong his life. And nor does he look like a soldier who's trying to be a poet, or a poet who's trying to avoid being a soldier. He just wears some generic Middle Eastern fantasy garb. It's not even an outfit, really. It doesn't have any personality or communicate anything about Taric as a person. It is the most background NPC-ass character design I've seen in quite a long time. His mace and his crystals have none of the stained glass aesthetic that the skin line is supposed to be based around, and as a character design, he has no meaningful interaction with either Malzahar's mystic thief design or Nasus's implacable fate god design. He literally just looks like some fucking guy. This skin is remarkably pointless. Number 5. Spirit Blossom Springs Sett. Spirit Blossom Springs is a fan service skinline, and one that does succeed in multiple places. Yunara and Volibear both do pretty well, and Sett really kind of should have. Like, this should have worked, especially with the genuinely kind of killer concept they came up with to base him on. This is supposed to be Sett recovering from injury. He has taken one too many broken ribs in the arena, and his mom has ordered him to go and rest and recover. Now, a hot, sexy dude, but he's injured and a little bit vulnerable. This is the erotic fantasy that powers entire sectors of the romance industry. There is tremendous sensual and erotic potential in a big, powerful man who's being forced to surrender to vulnerability and softness and tenderness. People go absolutely feral for the fantasy of a big, tough guy who pushes himself too hard, going soft and showing pain in front of you, because you see his weakness in a way that no one else is allowed to. Also, not for nothing, but bandages are such an easy means to eroticize a body. They cling tight to the form, they can be strategically parted to show skin here and there, and they can be made tight to emphasize volume and hardness and softness. Like the skin-tight superhero bodysuit, they are the perfect excuse to show a character being naked without technically showing them naked. Instead of any of that, though, we get a fan service version of Sett, which isn't really showing all that much more skin than base Sett was showing already. It isn't really eroticized or sexualized any more than base Sett, and it doesn't even imply any difference in attitude or demeanor than what base Sett has. And even in spite of not wearing any pants, you don't even really get good thigh or ass action from Sett here. Nothing about this skin seems to really care about eroticizing his body. The idea of his fur collar being reframed as steam billowing off his hot, sweaty body, like, yeah, that's theoretically good, but unlike Yunara, who gets her textures painted to imply glistening, sweaty skin, Sett here just looks bone fucking dry, which, you know, where the fuck is the steam supposed to be coming from then, if he isn't at least a little sweaty? I think that the people who really want to fuck Sett deserve to be pandered to much more shamelessly than this. This skin isn't trying to be sexy, it's trying to be cool, and that's just not the same thing. Number 4, Arcana Jhin. To be honest with you, I'm not really committed to the idea that Arcana Jhin is specifically the 4th worst skin of the year. He could be the 7th worst or whatever, but I just couldn't resist making the joke. And I will freely admit, a not insignificant amount of my dislike for this skin comes from just how much he reminds me of fucking Shatterstar. Like, good god, it is uncanny. But it's also a matter of just how much this skin squanders the potential of the Arcana skin line. Arcana skins are supposed to be these semi-divine mystical manipulators of fate and magic, dwelling in realms of arcane psychic geometry. They are supposed to be unknowable and austere and mysterious in some way, like the figures of the tarot. But Jhin is wearing a bright red spandex, a ridiculous 3-pronged poncho, a skull-faced mask with faces as earmuffs, a face on the back of the head, a gun with a face on it, a shoulder piece with 3 more faces on it, and metal kneecaps, again with more faces on them, and when you pile all of that on top of his side-swept Shatterstar haircut and his lopsided color scheme, what you end up with is a design that just looks gaudy. Like, it's not just that his haircut reminds me of Shatterstar, it's that his whole entire vibe reminds me of over-designed 90s comic book try-hard nonsense. Slap a belt of pouches on his thighs and make the anatomy and the splash art bad, and I would believe that Rob Liefeld character designed this. I have said multiple times before that one of the big failures in how Jhin skins are designed is that they're all trying so fucking hard to make him cool, because they all buy into this idea that he's a scary, cool, Sigma, evil, sniper mastermind. Arcana Jhin is a demonstration of what happens when that philosophy goes way too far, with a skin that ends up flailing so desperately for cool that it can only really manage silly. Now, I have room in my heart for a cheesy comic book villain version of Jhin, but not like this. And not in the Arcana skin line. Number 3. Spirit Blossom Zyra. This skin's biggest problem is ultimately that Zyra is and always will be Wish.com Poison Ivy. She's a sexy, leggy babe archetype strutting around in high heels with tentacles wrapped around her arms. These are the facts of her design, built into it from the ground up, and she carries skins that account for all of this pretty darn well, honestly. Blood Moon, Dragon Sorceress Coven, and even Crime City Nightmare make good use of these parts of her character design. What she does not carry very well, though, is a skin where she's supposed to be a woman with a broken heart who longed to forget her sorrow, who a powerful spirit enchanted so that her tears turned to blossoms, her body took root, and in her garden of forgetting, weary hearts wander into its embrace, hoping that the blooms will ease their grief. Grief, sorrow, the desire to forget pain and sink into oblivion, these are all soft, heavy, smothering feelings. But Zyra is sharp. Zyra is light and pointy. Grief is possibly the opposite of erotic, but Zyra is sexy. Sorrow is dull and heavy and numbing, and Zyra is exciting, bright, and colorful. Zyra simply does not look like the esoteric spirit of an ancient Ionian fairy tale. She just doesn't, and certainly not one about grief. But honestly, she wouldn't even really fit the role of a spirit whose concept is, I don't know, old-timey sexy evil bondage or whatever. Zyra's expression and aesthetic of sexy is just so contemporary and current day. She looks fundamentally modern. She doesn't have the air of a mournful spirit of some deep and ancient past. She looks like, well, a model, really. You know how some people talk about certain actors having iPhone face and just not fitting in historical settings? That's basically what's happening here. Zyra doesn't look like the venerable ancient spirit of a long-forgotten soul-consuming grief. She looks like she knows what Google is. There is a deep and genuinely confusing mismatch here, not just between the champion and their written concept, but between the fundamental design language of the character and the entire skin line that they're supposed to be a part of. Number 2. Battle Academia, Xayah, and Rakan. There is, to me, something vaguely insulting about basing a skin which is this terminally boring on a Kill la Kill reference of all things. It's a bit insulting to Kill la Kill, first of all, an anime which is, for better or worse, going maximally ham and over the top at all times. Like, you really think that the spirit of Kill la Kill is invoked by this bored-looking side character with a big grey metal wing? Kill la Kill had the guts to be juvenile and angry and horny, but Xayah here barely looks like she gives a shit about where she is, and somehow this design manages to make a crop-top school uniform look both boring and kind of unsexy, which feels fundamentally contrary to the spirit of shonen anime. But this skin also feels kind of insulting because the reference is the kind of pandering that reveals that the skin has no interesting ideas of its own. Riot couldn't actually make anything worthwhile out of Xayah here, so instead they're trying to steal an interesting personality from an anime that actually has one. There is a fine line between being inspired by something versus just trying to ride its coattails for clout, and Xayah is riding those tails like they're Rakan on Valentine's Day. She is galloping on that thing. Also, this is supposed to be a legendary skin. You know, the kind of skin that used to be almost the peak of quality for a League of Legends cosmetic, but you'd be forgiven if you couldn't tell that by looking at it, given the absolutely absurd levels of animation and acid reuse on display here. This genuinely falls into the realms of false fucking advertising. As for Rakan's place on this list, well, literally the whole point of the Xayah and Rakan couples dynamic is that Xayah is dour and emo, while Rakan is a big colorful peacock himbo. But Battle Academia not only makes Xayah mostly kind of grey and boring, it also puts Rakan in a grey suit with black hair, he's not showing any skin, and he's got a genuinely hideous goatee. Xayah and Rakan are supposed to be extreme opposites that attract, but in Battle Academia they are just middlingly similar nobodies that happen to be standing next to each other. Number 1. Spirit Blossom Ivern. I have struggled a bit to articulate what exactly makes Spirit Blossom Ivern the worst skin of the year, worse than anything else on this list, because it isn't a lesser skin trying to pass itself off as a legendary like Xayah does, it's not a pointless also-ran like Fatebreaker Taric, and it isn't nearly as awful as Pool Party Twitch, so what's the issue here? And honestly, I think a big part of it is that I think even Riot knows that this skin is bullshit. The good folks of the League of Legends wiki are meticulous about providing accurate credits for every piece of splash art in the game, but for quite a long time after Spirit Blossom Ivern was released, Riot simply didn't want to say who it was that did the splash art. And you can kind of understand why. Because the splash art sucks. It is the most boring, basic, uninteresting illustration of Ivern you could possibly imagine. A head-on, featureless character shot of him in some nondescript cloud of pink leaves with literally everything that is not in center frame blurred absolutely to hell, presumably in an attempt to obscure the fact that the splash art has no meaningful location, setting, or storytelling. Now, we do know who did the splash art. It was Rudy Siswanto, the illustration art lead for Riot Games, and Rudy is a tremendously skilled artist. He is responsible for splash arts like Darkstar Cho'Gath, Sentinel Rengar, Cheddar Chief Twitch, Soul Fighter Viego, and Winterblessed Warwick. And when you compare those illustrations to what Spirit Blossom Ivern looks like, yeah, it's pretty fucking clear that Siswanto was not exactly putting forth his A-game here. And I'm sure he would have if he had been told to do that, but I don't think he was told to. I think that either the production process was really badly mismanaged and Siswanto had to crunch in some overtime at the last minute to crank out a bare minimum splash art for a rushed half-ass product. Or else, Riot made the conscious decision during the production process to tell him, yeah, don't waste your time making a good splash art for this one, because this skin isn't worth the wages we'd have to pay you for your time. Whatever the case may be, though, what you can plainly tell as an audience is that even Riot doesn't think that Spirit Blossom Ivern is worth the effort it took them to make it. And that gets us to the other infuriating thing about this skin. Spirit Blossom Ivern should have been a fucking slam dunk. Unlike Zyra, whose design fundamentally struggles to fit the tone of the setting, Spirit Blossom Ivern ought to be the most natural fit in the universe. That's a skin which any half-decent designer ought to be able to make awesome with one hand tied behind their back and a blindfold on. Ivern was made to look good in a Spirit Blossom aesthetic. It should have been so incredibly easy. Instead, what we get is barely more than a chroma, just Ivern and a bit of pink and blue, with absolutely bare minimum changes to his mesh and his model, and textures that are higher resolution than his base version, but significantly less well-painted and interesting. It's all so smoothed over and featureless and boring. It looks like someone put Ivern through 14 shitty Instagram beauty filters. Riot blatantly could not be bothered to give a shit about a free Battle Pass skin. It is filler and it is slop, because as far as Riot Games Incorporated is concerned, non-paying players are freeloaders. They said so out loud themselves. Free players are a nuisance and an annoyance to be placated while the company hunts the whales whose money it actually cares about. That's what Spirit Blossom Ivern says to me, and that is why it's the worst skin of the year. And that's it. Those are my top 10 worst skins of the year. It honestly does feel good just to purge some of all that venom and bile, because God, I despise how Riot is run by its management. Anyway, if you want the positive, happy, good vibes list, go watch the top 10 best skins video, or, if you're a real kind of freak, watch the entire 2-hour and 45-minute compilation of every single skin review I did in 2025. So, like, comment, subscribe, and all the rest of it. If you want to, I'm not your dad, you can do whatever the hell you want, and much though I would love your support as a channel member or on Patreon, right now, right at the moment, a better place to put your money might be in Doctors Without Borders or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. A single dollar can do a lot of good in their hands, whereas in my hands, mostly what it's funding is more League of Legends skin reviews and Pokemon hot takes, which, you know, maybe that's not what the world needs right now. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Remember to be kind to one another, have solidarity with those who are struggling, and may the tides of history wash gently over us all.